Hi there, my name's Simon Drew, and I'd like to welcome you to the Practical Stoic Podcast, where I give you practical Stoic advice for modern times. If you'd like to learn more about Stoicism, or if you want some added inspiration in your day, just go to my website. It's risetothegoodlife.com. If you're interested in transforming your life with Stoic principles, then I also offer one-on-one coaching. To book your first free session, just head to risetothegoodlife.com/coaching and follow the links. But for now, enjoy this episode. Hi there, my name's Simon Drew, and welcome to the Practical Stoic Podcast. I recently had a listener suggest a question to me for the Wednesday podcast, and the question was, which animal do you believe best represents Stoicism? I was also interested in hearing what people came up with because since the beginning of humanity, people have been looking at certain animals for inspiration and for instruction, based on the virtues that they possess. And the Stoics were no exception. For example, in episode number 10 of this podcast, I shared one of Seneca's stories where he talks about the courage and vigor of the untamed lion. But even though the Stoics have absolutely used animals in their analogies in their writings, this was a controversial question because some have suggested that it is wrong to think of any other animal other than human beings as having the virtues of Stoicism. And although I do see that point, I do at the same time disagree because I think that it's very practical to find the virtues of Stoicism all around us, including in nature. It's no different to me to getting a tattoo saying Memento Mori or having letters from a Stoic sitting on your bedside table at all times. These things remind us to be better and to aspire to higher virtues. And in the same way, looking at animals for inspiration reminds us to cultivate the virtues that those animals have. Sure, no animal other than human beings can truly be stoic, but many animals possess certain qualities that would be great for any human being to aspire to. And in my opinion, the more we are reminded of stoic values, the more likely we are to practice them. So with this in mind, I'll go to our first answer, and it comes from Dan, who said, "For an animal to represent Stoicism, I would choose the North American buffalo or bison. They are social animals living in large groups. They are capable of great speed when necessary, but their even temperament gives them a more contemplative aspect. They don't seek to harm other creatures, and yet their power is undeniable and they inspire respect." So Dan, thank you so much for that response. I absolutely love the North American bison. And I think you've brought up some great points there for why the bison would represent Stoicism in your mind. So thank you so much for that. And so moving on, we had an answer from Matthew who said, "I believe the animal that best represents Stoicism is the dolphin. Dolphins are said to have healing power towards humans, and people swim with them for that reason. Dolphins are social animals. They travel in pods, communicate with each other, and even have unique whistles for each other. There are many similarities between dolphins and humans, such as recognition, self-awareness, holding conversations, and having sex for pleasure. I'm sure that there are many other similarities to humans as well. Walking near to the beach today, I was watching the dolphins come up for air and return to the ocean, and it reminded me of Marcus Aurelius' quote regarding throwing the rock into the air and it coming back down remaining unchanged. It also reminds me to pause and take a deep breath. The dolphins migrating up and down the coast, depending on what season it is, shows that they have direction and aren't just drifting in their life. I could go on, but I think that I've made my point that I believe dolphins do represent Stoicism." Matthew, thank you so much for that response. I particularly love how you said that the dolphins remind you to pause and take a breath from time to time. I think that we all need that reminder to, come up out of the water and just take a breath and pause for a moment. It's so important to just quiet the mind. So I think that's really great. Thank you so much for that response. And, this is one of the reasons why I think that this question and these answers are going to be really helpful for some of you because it's all about learning from life. It's learning and observing nature and observing the world. And, what Matthew said there was that, he saw these dolphins and he was reminded to do something, which was to breathe or to pause. And it's so important to have these little reminders. And so I'm hoping that maybe some of you will, in the future, if you see a dolphin, be reminded of this podcast and you'll be reminded to breathe, to pause. Because that's what you've learned here, and that's what the dolphin now represents. And so I think that that's only a positive thing. So thank you so much again for that answer, Matthew. And the next answer came from Anthony, and he said, "The best animal for me that represents Stoicism is the domestic cat. My cat is friendly but independent. As the saying goes, dogs have owners and cats have staff. If she goes out and we're not there to let her back in, she just waits patiently. No complaining. If my granddaughter grabs her, she just puts up with it. She sometimes sits on the wall looking at the birds in the garden, which I think of as the view from above." And we had another vote for the family pet from Leo, who said, "I was tossing up between a bird and a dog and finally settled on the dog. Dogs represent many of the Stoic qualities. For example, they are always joyful around you no matter how the day has gone. They get you back to enjoying nature as you partake on your regular walks. They are courageous and loyal. They are mostly non-judgmental and happy to mix with most people and other animals." So Anthony and Leo, thank you so much for those answers. I love that people are looking for Stoicism and aspects of Stoicism in every single area of their life, including the family pet. I think that's so awesome. So thank you so much for those responses. And next we had an answer from Gunnar, and he said, "An unlikely candidate for me would be the camel. It's an animal that has learned to adapt to some of the harshest environments in the world. It has learned to conserve water and fat in order to survive the harshest of times. I feel like this is a strong parallel to Stoicism in the sense that while living in accordance with nature, we must learn to not only survive the more challenging times in our lives, but we must also prepare for them. The Stoics teach us to prepare our bodies and minds through the rigors of life, and I feel like the camel represents this well." Gunnar, thank you so much for that answer. I couldn't agree more. I think that's such a great example of an animal that represents the hardiness that we need to develop and the ability that we need to develop to withstand the harsh realities of life. So I really love that. Thank you so much. And moving on, we had a brief answer from Josh, who said, "It's the same animal that I pick as my own favorite, the wolf. To me, at least, the wolf represents loyalty, patience, understanding, courage, and intellect." So Josh, thank you so much for that response. I have recently been learning a little bit more about wolves, and that is a crazy animal. And I think that that's absolutely true. They do represent those values that you just mentioned there. That's awesome. Thank you. And moving on to an answer from Jacob, who said, "I would choose the tardigrade. It has the ability to endure some of the harshest conditions known to man. If an animal without the ability to reason can endure harsh circumstances with equanimity, I think that we can all at least manage that." The tardigrade reminds me of a quote from Marcus Aurelius that says, quote, "Nothing happens to anyone that he can't endure. The same thing happens to other people, and they weather it unharmed, out of sheer obliviousness or because they want to display character. Is wisdom really so much weaker than ignorance or vanity?" End quote. So Jacob, thank you so much for that response. And this is another animal, the tardigrade, I've been learning about recently. It's so interesting. This animal is found in pretty much every single part of the world, no matter how harsh. It just is able to survive anything. And so that is definitely something that we can aspire to. And I also really love that quote that you shared, so thank you for sharing that with us. Next, we had an answer from Benjamin, who said, "I would say that the animal that reminds me of Stoicism is the rat. I've owned many of them over the years. I currently have 3, and my oldest just recently lost the use of his back legs. I just got 2 more babies to keep him company after he lost his brother. Through losing his brother and his mobility, he continues on and pulls himself by his front legs. He tolerates his new nephews quite nicely after a short introduction period. Overall, rats deal with what happens to them, and if they lose things like a loved one or mobility or body parts, they just continue on." Benjamin, thank you so much for that response, and I think I speak for the whole community when I say that we want to see a picture of this rat because he sounds like an absolute champion. And I've seen this in other animals. You might see like a bird at the beach, for example, who has a wonky leg, or another animal like a pigeon that has something wrong with its leg or something wrong with one of its wings. And animals, they live by nature, and so they don't complain if something happens like that. Mostly because they don't have the ability to really complain about it, but all that they understand is that I must keep on going because I've got to survive, and that's what they do. They just keep on going no matter what. So I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And the second last response comes from Justin, and he says, I think about the phoenix rising from the ashes, experiencing rebirth after destruction, ever resilient. The letter from Seneca, where he talks about the lesson to be drawn from the burning of Lyons, tells us that even after devastation we can come back stronger than ever before and prevail amidst the trials of fortune. So Justin, thank you so much for that response. I appreciate that, and I love that we're moving towards mythical creatures now. But I do really appreciate this analogy, because that letter that Seneca wrote about the burning of that city really was so insightful, and it was amazing to see what he talked about there. You know, that we really can come back stronger after any horrifying situation that we face in life. So thank you for that answer. And our final answer comes from Natasha, and she says, based on Donald Robertson's article about animal metaphors in Stoicism, he references how both Epictetus and Seneca mention the bull who protects the rest of the herd. I had never thought about Stoicism in this way. I really like the metaphor of an animal whose focus is protecting those less able. This is Stoic cosmopolitanism in practice. And Natasha, thank you so much for that response. I really love that. I think that's such a great analogy there, the bull protecting the rest of the herd. And I agree that this absolutely could represent Stoic cosmopolitanism as we know it. So thank you so much for that response. And that was our final response for today. And I just want to thank all of you who answered this question and sent in your responses, whether that was through email or whether that was on the Facebook group. And I really do think that this has been a really helpful exercise. And personally, for me, I know that when I see these animals that have been mentioned in this podcast today, I will absolutely be reminded to try to live up to those virtues that we've been mentioning today. And so once again, I want to thank all of you who have contributed, and I'll talk to you in the next episode. But until then, I hope that this episode has helped you on your rise to the good life. Ciao. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Practical Stoic Podcast. I hope that you've gotten a lot of value out of it, and I hope that it helps you to live a better life. If you have enjoyed the podcast, then don't forget to subscribe so that you'll be the first to know when there are new episodes. If you really love the podcast, then I would appreciate a positive review, whether that's on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever else you listen. Don't forget that if you're interested in one-on-one Stoic coaching, then you can head to risetothegoodlife.com/coaching to book your first free session today.